it does lend this, this question: what is an invasion? Now, to all of us, to people on the ground in Ukraine, Russian troops moving across into Ukrainian sovereign territory, shelling buildings, people caught in the crossfire, certainly sounds like an invasion. But when you get down to the definition of this, it becomes so much more complicated. Of course, the UN sets out what an act of war is, not in words but in deeds, and that is a state moving into the territory of another state, occupying the territory of another state, committing violence against the territory in the territory of another state. Now, all of that would fit, wouldn't it, what Vladimir Putin has done? But then there are exceptions to this. Intervention for humanitarian grounds, questions of sovereignty. Vladimir Putin says he's intervening, sending his peacekeepers in because there is a genocide being committed against Russian-speaking population of eastern Ukraine. Now, where's the evidence for that? That's certainly being disputed, but that's his allegation. There are questions of sovereignty. He points to the Minsk II agreements after the earlier conflict in Ukraine in 2014 and says that sets out self-governance, autonomy for Luhansk and Donetsk. So again, he questions the sovereignty of Ukraine. And then there is international law. Is this a contravention of international law? Well, the United States was accused of contravening international law when it went into Iraq. The bombing of the former Yugoslavia, the NATO bombing that the US was also involved in, again, allegations of a breach of international law. But international law is a series of covenants and consent, and there is no place, there is no legality to that, if you like. There are places that can enforce international law, like the International Criminal Court. The United States, for instance, does not recognise that. There's the International Maritime Court in The Hague that ruled against any occupation or claiming of the disputed islands in the South China Sea. China went ahead and did it anyway. So when you come to international law, definitions of an invasion, what constitutes an invasion, it is a grey area, and countries can exploit that, and we're seeing this now with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, Phil, what Putin is doing, I mean, it's so brazen when he calls the troops peacekeeping forces. Nobody believes it. It's been called out on the international stage as nonsense. So why does he bother?
Well, it's for domestic consumption. As Stan was saying, he's arguing that there's a genocide against the Russian-speaking population in that part of Ukraine. And he's defending them. He's going in to look after those people and make sure that slaughter doesn't continue. Well, as Stan said, there's no evidence of that happening anyway, but that's for domestic consumption. He's got to have a reason, even for his own people, to send the troops in because they are now in harm's way. And of course, he wants to maintain a moral high ground from his perspective and for his audience, which is tightly controlled through state media, by the way. And so that's why that's important for him. But of course, the UN has come out and said they are not peacekeepers. This is an insult to those that wear the blue berets, the blue helmets, that are actual peacekeepers under UN auspices, and that they should remove themselves immediately. Well, that's not going to happen. And now we wait to see just how far is Putin prepared to go to enforce what he says is his saviour mission, and what, of course, most of the rest of the world and certainly most Ukrainians see as a simple invasion of their territory.
And of course, Gemma, when we declare something an invasion, when we talk about a declaration of war, then begs the response, what are you going to do about it? And we've seen the response with sanctions. There were sanctions imposed after the annexation of Crimea, and I think it shaved out 1.5% off Russian GDP, and Vladimir Putin was prepared to live with that. He was prepared to see that out. He's no doubt made his calculations now about the impact of sanctions. He's got $600 billion in foreign reserves. China is his biggest trading partner. He believes that there is a cushion against the impact of those sanctions. And the bottom line is he knows full well, because Joe Biden has said so, the NATO countries have said so, they're not going to put troops into Ukraine. They're not going to spill blood to defend the sovereignty of Ukraine. Indeed, any diplomacy, any diplomatic resolution to this means that you have to compromise on the sovereignty of Ukraine, as has been put to me.
So
Ukraine becomes a bargaining chip.
Right? He's challenging the power of the US and NATO. Is he winning?
Well, people I've spoken to have said it's already a victory in the fact that he has acted, in the fact that we are now sitting around and wondering what is his next move. Now, he did this in Georgia when he intervened there to support two breakaway provinces. The annexation of Crimea. He's doing this again. His intervention in Syria, which has helped prop up the Assad regime. Vladimir Putin understands one thing. He knows that power exists to the extent that you use it. And he identifies red lines that the US has imposed in places like Syria and not acted on as a sign of weakness. When he annexed Crimea, yes, there were sanctions imposed, but he saw the reaction of the West as being inherently weak. He's not alone in this. Xi Jinping also sees the West as being inherently weak. They look at the US pull out of Afghanistan and point to that as an example of the US resolve. So this is a challenge now for the rest of the world to be able to deter Putin from moving further and to reach a resolution that does not sacrifice Ukraine's sovereignty, which Putin then will see absolutely as a victory.
So, Phil, as to what happens next, I mean, we know troops, tanks are on the borders. The latest count they believe is about 190,000 troops. Now, I mean, how long can they stay there? Do they either move in soon or go home? How long can they possibly stay out?
Well, there have been large numbers, tens of thousands of Russian troops there for nearly a year. So the answer is they can stay a long time. Of course, they're away from their home bases, they're away from their loved ones, and of course, no doubt that the troops would love to go home. But they will be there for as long as they're needed by Putin to further his aims. And look, those aims, let's be clear about this. What's happening right now? There is shelling happening right now. There's a little tiny town called, ironically, Happiness, which is in Luhansk, on the Ukrainian side, Ukrainian controlled side of that border. That was shelled in the last 24 hours. They have no power, they have no heating, and it's winter, and it's extremely cold. There are people dying every day still now. So we're talking about very big theories, and we're talking about legal obligations in international fora, but on the ground it's miserable already. And of course, if the Russians decide that they will help these new republics expand their territory, well, then a whole lot more bloodshed will occur.
And to that question of how long, well, it really hasn't stopped in that part since 2014. So you're talking to people who are already dealing with the impact of this. And we spoke to a representative of the Red Cross last night in Ukraine on our special here on the news channel, who said they need to get things like fresh drinking water, food, supplies, shelter, children. The impact of trauma, this is year after year. So we're seeing an escalation now of something that has not really stopped. And what it represents as well is, and we're already talking about potential catastrophe here. People are already talking about a war unseen since the end of World War II. And it does represent a clear challenge to what we've known with all of its contradictions and complexity, and at times hypocrisy. We know that it represents a challenge to what we know as a global rules-based order. The rules are being challenged and upended, and Putin wants to change the rules on the ground by occupation. And that is a clear challenge to the world that we live in, and hence we're seeing the response from Western powers.
And there is a red line, and that red line is Poland, it's the Baltic states, it's NATO. But beyond that, east of that, sorry, you're on your own, and that happens to be Ukraine.